Buttons again. Go live, go live. So shows we're live here. We will do just kind of a 15-second lead in. So if you are catching this on the replay on YouTube, all we're doing is just giving some ads some time to play for those trying to catch us live. And just a little delay here. So a little weird if you're watching the replay, but if you're catching it live, that means it's Thursday night. It's 7 p.m., which means it is time for everyone's favorite, the gold standard, the CarrGuy and SixFan show. You have found your way to my channel, Straight SixFan. As you know, that would make me SixFan here of the operation. And beside me is...
My name is Jason. I am CarrGuy of this operation, or Old Car Guy on YouTube. And when Grant kind of introduced us as the gold standard, he left out the fact that we are the gold standard of automotive YouTube chat here on YouTube. Guys, welcome and thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening.
Yeah, and so we have a very exciting episode lined up for you guys. We think it's either going to be really fun and interesting, or it could wind up being really boring and a train wreck. So bear with us, but the idea tonight is we're going to try to attempt to cover the history of the American Motor Company. But before we jump into that, I will let Jason introduce, well, not introduce, but kind of bring us up to speed who has joined us in the live chat.
Yeah, so we've got Trucker Dave was the first one in there this evening. We've got Will's Wheels, Darren's Gray Goat. We've also got those guys were chatting back and forth, so I got to scroll down here. We've got Efer Garage, and Trucker Dave is back in there again. Paul Speed Shop has joined us. Mustang Guy 6501, and Scott Speed Shop. Thanks for joining us tonight. Streetcar Culture. Herman Lomas. Thanks, Herm, for jumping in here. And that's everybody that's come in here. Oh, there's King Eric, the greatest of all. Glad to have you guys in here. And one of the things that we wanted to kind of touch base on a little bit before we get, diving into too many facts is we are learning with you guys on this show tonight. Grant and I have done a fair amount of research into AMC and kind of right from the beginning. And, we're trying our best to give you guys as much proper information as we can. But again, bear with us because we're not professionals.
We're not automotive historians, that's for sure. But and the other thing to keep in mind, so a lot of the research that did take place was basically kind of ramrodded in between the end of, as soon as we hit stop record with Emily and Aaron Reeves of Flying Sparks Garage last week, it was open the books and start looking for information. So this information is not even a week old. But before we kind of get into the meat of tonight's episode, I did want to remind everybody that what's at stake here in season 4, the raffle given away. This Flowmaster muffler, it's a 2.5-inch center in, offset out. Any $1 in super chat that is spent tonight gets you an entry to win this muffler by the end of season 4. It is a Delta Flow 50 series. So we appreciate the super chats. I appreciate the super chats. You're only eligible for this giveaway when I'm hosting. Jason will have his own raffle at some point. But you do get a pretty sweet prize at the end of it. There's some more rules we can get into later, not here. We just want to jump into the history of the American Motor Company. And I think where I want to start and where I think it's most interesting, anytime you talk about automotive history, much like anything, when something brand new kind of comes out of the earth, you have the founding members. And then when competition comes, you find out there are so many links and backstories all over the place. Everybody worked for somebody else at some point in time. And what I would direct you to, what I think is the most interesting way to help put this in perspective, because it becomes like reading the Count of Monte Cristo. You have to have like a flow chart of all of the characters involved in history. Is I would point you to a 3-part miniseries the History Channel did called The Cars That Made America. And it did a really great job of helping explain that. And so with that all being said, it should be of no surprise that the two companies that came to form the American Motor Company, thanks, by the way, Scott's Speed Shop there for the super chat. What the two most important things, Hudson and Nash Motors eventually came to form the American Motor Company. So it'd be no surprise that there's some links there. And so to first understand those two companies, you kind of got to understand General Motors. And so keep in mind the history of Buick and Oldsmobile as we go on. But with that, Jason's going to get us started with a little bit of the Nash Motor Company.
Yeah, once I take my mic off mute, I'll do that. So the biggest thing about Nash Motor Company is they've been around for a long time, and they are very much innovators and have been over the years of a lot of the things that we still have in our cars today. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the Nash Motor Company was formed by Charlie Nash, or Charles Nash, who is the former president of Buick and the former VP of GM. And he left there to come form the Nash Motor Company. And in 1917 was kind of the first model of the Nash 671, which is kind of their flagship car there for a little while. And they also took over the Jeffrey Company, which was building some trucks and stuff like that in Kenosha, which is kind of what keeps the roots of the Nash Motor Company in Wisconsin. So as we kind of move down through history, one of the big things with Nash and a lot of the names you're going to hear tonight revolves around the word merger. Because a lot of that stuff was kind of going on. There was a lot of information being passed back and forth between companies. And the first merger that Nash encountered was the Jeffrey Company. And after that, in 1924, they merged with a company, or they absorbed a company, I should say, Lafayette Motors. And then they started kind of looking at spreading out and seeing what they had to offer as far as what kind of cars they were building and how to be ingenuitive over some of the other car companies like the big three, which we still have around today. And one of the neat concepts about Nash that they hold or held for quite a long time is the nameplate ambassador. The ambassador nameplate's been around since from 1927 to 1974. So it's been around a long time, and it's bared the brand Nash and Hudson and a couple of others throughout the years. But when I first started talking about Nash, one of the big things I said was that they were innovators in the industry, and I'm just going to list down through a few of them that a lot of people don't realize that they were a part of. So they were innovators of the overhead valve engine. Because of Charlie Nash's connections with Buick, Buick was dabbling in that, and Charlie Nash had some guys that were keen on making this happen. So the straight 8 overhead valve engine, the heater core, as we know it today, is something that Nash was a first in. And that was basically allowing fresh air to come through the vehicle and to be able to adjust the hot and cold, and therefore defrosting your windows. That was a big thing for them. Vacuum controlled shifting. I didn't look too much into that, but I can only imagine that it was aiding in the shifting and trying to get leaning towards that automatic transmission. The Nash 600 introduced the first American-made, let me try this again. Nash 600 was introduced as the first American mass-produced unibody vehicle. So unibody has been around, and Nash was kind of an innovator in that. Seat belts in 1950, and let's see, the first brand company to have a single unit heater and AC, actual cooling AC. And adjustable in-car suspension. So there's a couple of things that they've had going for them that's kind of brought them to the front, and what's kind of made them stand out as a brand. I know I'm rambling on here talking about a lot of stuff, but Grant, I don't know if there's anything you want to add into that that kind of brings us up to, I guess any of the big things that are happening.
Well, I would say that you talked about the ambassador nameplate, how that was one that lived through the history of Nash all the way through AMC. Similarly with the Hornet and the Rambler when we start talking Hudson. And so, we always talk about these retro styles and these throwbacks that companies are doing, bringing back the Ford Bronco. Well, If you think about the history of AMC, they were bringing back these nameplates from their heritage. And so I think as we dive into the Hudson culture, very interesting history as well. So basically, Hudson came kind of formed out of Roy Chapin, Howard Coffin, James Brady, Frederick Binzer, and Roscoe Jackson. These were 5 gentlemen that all worked together at the Olds Motor Works Company in like early 1900s. They were basically the core that came to set up the Hudson Motor Company around 1908. Now, there were more people involved, but for simplicity's sake, it was said that Roy Chapin was and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. So that's another reason why we put that disclaimer out at the beginning. Maybe it's Chapin. I don't know. But old Roy, we'll call him. He was more the charismatic leader of the group, and so he would, as time would go on, would kind of surface to the top, become the president chair. So we kind of fast forward to right around the 1920 mark, because that's where I think the Hudson Motor Company's history starts to get the most interesting. And it was the introduction of the Essex model that really started to do some things that the rest of the industry wasn't. They had a 179 cubic inch, 55 horsepower motor, which was about triple what the Model T was making. And then as the Essex model evolved over the next couple of years, it became the first, what do they call it? The closed carriage. Basically, if you think about the Model Ts with the open doors and things like that, they figured out a way to make a competitively priced closed cabin car. And the market took note of that. And, it wasn't necessarily cheaper than any open cabins, but it was the cheapest closed cabin. And so what that did for them is sales started to really skyrocket right around the 1920s. So much so that Hudson was the number 3 auto manufacturer in 1925, 1926. And then right before the Great Depression hit, they had grown so much, or their business acumen was so well tuned, that they had 2 plants overseas in, I want to say, let's see here, I have in my notes, England and Germany. And they had assembly plants set up with distributors in countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Argentina, and Brazil to assemble the cars. And so they were really like doing some things. They were, in a lot of ways, they were one step ahead of the industry. And it was, again, that styling the Essex model had done so well through the 20s. That really helped push Ford to know, okay, it's time to start working on that Model A. That's, it's well documented. Henry Ford, again, that History Channel miniseries does a good job of just showing how bullheaded old Henry Ford was. Really didn't want to move off of the known quantity, what he knew that worked. But you could really credit probably Hudson to help him get the old man off of his Alpha Dead Center there and start producing a car like the Model A. One thing I wanted to say, I'll pause a little bit as we talk about this episode. The reminder that if you're missing it, you can catch us, or re-listen to this on a podcast version on SoundCloud. This episode, while we try to get them up on Friday, might go up on Saturday for reasons I won't get into. But I also wanted to mention there's this book that's been very helpful in Jason and I's research, this Storied Independent Automakers book. I'll leave a link in the description below to Amazon, hopefully, to where you can pick up a copy of yours. Jason has his notes there as well. But this is where we're getting a lot of our information. Anyway, back to the Hudson Company. And honestly, so as we all know, the Great Depression did a number on a lot of the automakers. And so Hudson's sales really started to struggle between 29 and 30. Of course, the Model A is in there, mixed in there as well, but they had a 62% cut in sales in that year, and then followed that up with a 49% cut in sales from 30 to 31. So Hudson, which was living high on the hog there in the early 20s, all of a sudden found itself struggling big time. So it was the third model, the Terraplane, that they brought out, and it was called the Terraplane because at the time Americans were in love with the idea of the airplane. And so they had even had Amelia Earhart as a spokeswoman, or kind of a marketing model, if you will, that helped roll out the Terraplane. But unfortunately, the sales never did quite recoup. And before you know it, we were finding ourselves into the World War, which Jason will take over with that here in a second. But right there at 1936, Roy Chapin, whatever, died. Died in 1936, and that also ushered in a new era of leadership. A.E. Barrett, who was actually like appointed general manager by Chapin before he died, takes over in 1938. But we will pick up with that here after talk about what did auto manufacturers do during World War II, Jason.
Well, I want to back up a little bit and talk about what Nash was actually doing during World War One, because we both of these companies were kind of around at the same time. And when Nash kind of took over the Jeffrey company, Jeffrey was kind of innovative for making heavy equipment and heavy trucks and stuff like that. In fact, they were actually even making four-wheel drive or four-wheel drive style trucks for hauling stuff. And that was their core to being able to produce those heavy equipment trucks for the war effort in World War One. So Nash was the leading producer of military trucks by the end of the World War One. In World War Two, some of the big highlights, they were all doing a lot of things because the government or Congress kind of mandated that we want you to halt on making certain things or using chrome or using this or that, which really halted a lot of what the car manufacturers were doing back then, and Nash and Hudson were no different. So Nash is credited with building what's called the double wasp engine for Pratt Whitney. And they were a 2,000 horsepower airplane engine, like a rotary style piston engine. And they produced several, or I should say several, I think it was 124,000 of these engines during the war. Excuse me. They also were building helicopters for Sikorsky. The R6A, if you want to look that up, is just a small little two-passenger helicopter that was done for basically using, for aerial tracking and just kind of lookout type stuff. But nevertheless, they were building those, and if my memory serves me correctly, they were building those in Wisconsin as well. So played a pretty heavy part in the war effort by being able to build some of this equipment for the war when they weren't able to build any cars.
Yeah, so some of the other things, kind of just miscellaneous things, I've written down. So so the company name Nash also had been referenced plenty of times. Nash-Kelvinator, which I believe Kelvinator was like an appliance brand. It was mainly what they did, but because of that put Nash in a position to produce 650,000 bomb fuses, 204,000 rocket motors, and they also supplied 200,000 binoculars for the government through World War II. Hudson, on the other hand, their kind of big claims to fame through wartime production were 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns for the Navy. They did fuselage tail sections for a couple different planes, including a B-26 bomber and a B-29 bomber. They even did some, I mean, the list goes on, but they did, I think, like a capsule for the front of a car, or excuse me, plane. The I don't remember the specific term. Oh, armored cabin. There we go. is what I was trying to do. But it was what was interesting about the effect of the war, though, on these manufacturers is because the government's contracts, the way they were written, sometimes the smaller companies had a hard time because everything was so rushed, like plans and blueprints of all of these things. The smaller manufacturers kind of got in trouble because they would have to retool, and it was harder for them to do things like that. And so, like, the guaranteed money from the government, oftentimes they would wind up spending more money. So they didn't make great profit margins. Sometimes they took a loss just to help keep up with production for wartime. And so those lasting effects would kind of show themselves as we roll into the post-war era. But Jason, anything I'm missing from the World War II era?
Nothing that you're missing specifically, but I did want to point out that I missed a note that I had written here. We were talking about the innovation of some of the innovative things that Nash was doing. A lot of the little things that they were known for was their high quality in switches and buttons and different stuff like that, which is why when you said they were making fuses and this and that for different things, they had that coming out of the Kelvinator industry, of appliances with that quality. So that's something that Nash, after that little kind of takeover of Kelvinator, there's a couple of things that come out of that which we're going to get to in a minute. But one of them was the quality of the switches and their electronics of the time, and that played a big part in the war effort as well. You're muted.
Yes, mute. Awesome. It's because I said all the good stuff. No, I was going to say before we go into post World War II factoids, I did want to say thanks for all the super chats coming in. I did want to clear one thing up, though. You get one entry per every dollar you spend. So $4.99 unfortunately gets you $4. Nathan, I apologize that we didn't clarify that. But those are the rules. So anyway, thanks everybody for that. I'm trying to write you down as entries here. So real quick, Jason, if you don't mind, just saying a little bit more so I can tie this up on my end.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I do see that we also had another super chat come in from King Eric, the greatest of all, $1.99. So again, like he said, that $1.99, you're just only going to get you one entry. And that money does not go to me for Moosehead or Molson's, because tonight's show is on Grant's channel, and that is for his draw. Now, next week it'll be on mine, and I will explain to you what's going on with mine, and we can get to that at a later time. But basically, one of the things that came out of the merger, or the kind of acquisition of Kelvinator, was Mr. George Mason. Yes, George Mason.
Yes, George Mason.
Yeah, who kind of led Nash into the next big thing, which kind of is what we're getting at here, tying Nash together with Hudson, to the point where all of a sudden we've got two car companies who are going to kind of wind themselves together and use the best of both worlds, including names and sharing names and stuff like that. But Grant, why don't we talk a little bit about what led to the merger of AMC, or of Nash and Hudson, to become AMC?
Absolutely. So as the reason for the merger, it was basically because as we're rolling out of post World War II time, well, first off, the American government put in place kind of some stipulations, some rules to help out the small independent automakers to make sure they got a certain percentage of the market share. And so they were kind of protected in the first couple of years rolling out of the gate, your 1946, 1947 model years. And where being the smaller manufacturer was a disadvantage during the wartime for retooling and things like that, that was an advantage right out of the gate because they could basically fire up faster. And Hudson was actually one of the first car companies to produce a new car in 1945. They were as soon as August of 45, they were rolling out a 46 model, which, truth be told, was actually a 1942 car with an updated grille. But you got to do what you got to do, right? And so, as Jason talked about, the strength of what Nash had was leadership. George Mason, whereas where we left off before the war, A.E. Barrett had just taken over. He, on the other hand, he was very good out of the gate again for Hudson, getting them to some firsts between 45 and 49. Both companies would find themselves peaking right about 1949, but Nash was able to sustain themselves a little bit better between 49, 50, 51 than Hudson, which really took a hard hit, which is very interesting because while Hudson was on a downward slide in sales from basically 49 on, I mean, it was just a constant drop. Meanwhile, the Hudson Hornet was introduced in 51, and this is about the same time as the both Hudson and Nash had, as Jason mentioned earlier, this unitized body frame construction was innovative for the automotive market. And so Hudson, they called theirs something a little bit different, step-down frame construction, but it was more or less, it's the same kind of thing, smaller compact cars. It's interesting as the history rolls on from this point forward, it's going to be the small car that kind of continually dooms the history of the company as it goes on. Even when it goes into to AMC, and we'll get into that later, but it dooms, and you just ride this wave. It's ups and downs. But anyway, the Hudson Hornet starts kicking tail in the NASCAR circuit between 51 and 53. In 1952, for instance, the Hudson Hornet was responsible for winning 27 of 34 NASCAR Grand National races. Let that sink in for a minute. This company that could do no better than like 10th in the basically production numbers of all the automotive manufacturers was winning 27 out of 34 races in 52. And then they followed it up in 53 with winning 22 races. So it's really interesting, but at the same time, right when you kind of crest over the 1950 mark, of course, the Korean War begins to start putting an impact on the market with steel demands and stamping. And there's this really great quote, and before I hand it back over to Jason, that I thought really kind of helps sum up where Hudson wasn't thinking right. They're only producing like three different models in a given year in this time frame. But they say they probably had too many architects on hand, like me, too many designers. It says, while GM, this is straight out of the book, and I quote, Hudson's real disadvantage came from using too many distinct parts. While GM used only 2 styles of door handles for 48 cars, Hudson used 6 different on the same body. It was believed that the average Hudson required twice as many fasteners as any GM car. So it's kind of paralysis by analysis there. But as we're rolling out of the 50s, and again, you kind of see like crisscrossing like paths. So early success of Hudson then dips off. Nash kind of started out slower, but then they're riding the wave. And so I think while we were talking about leadership, again, it's George Mason who appoints this guy named George W. Romney as vice president in the year 1953. And that's, I think, where Jason's going to pick up.
Yeah, so, and part of that was that George Mason saw in George Romney himself as a leader and somebody who could do well with the company. That's why he kept bumping him up. And one of the things that Grant and I were talking about off air before we went live was that when Romney came on board, they gave him now we're talking 1954 money, guys. They gave him a salary of $125,000 a year. Convert that to today's dollar, $1.194 million for a salary to do what George Romney was about to do with the company. Now, George Mason is accredited with the merger, with kind of taking the reins and making Nash Motor Company and Hudson kind of come together and form American Motors in 1954. And the one of the things that kind of came out of that was the strength and the difference of leadership between Hudson and Nash. And of course, with George Mason being at the helm of that, kind of led things down, I guess, as close to the proper path as we could say that they were, because like we all know, AMC they were doomed, I think, almost from the beginning. But nevertheless, they came together, they formed that, and in 1954, and that was, I believe, in January, and in October, Mason dies. Just when things were kind of getting good, and that leads Romney to become the leader or the president or whatever you want to call it of the AMC. So, Grant, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the changes that happened with Hudson from the time that the merger happened until shortly after? Because I know there was a couple of things, and I've got some notes here too, that changed for Hudson when that merger happened.
Yeah, you might be filling in more pieces for me than expected, but what I will say is, again, it's right around 1950 to 53. Both leaders can kind of see problems are coming. And one of the other contributing factors to neither of them starting to succeed was the fact that neither of the two companies were producing V8s for their cars. Only Packard of the independent automakers was out there at that time creating their own V8. And it was actually, when mergers were being discussed, it was as far back as 1946 that George Mason of Nash was thinking about this. So he, again, had that foresight of all these people. However, Sorry, I saw a super chat again. So thank you, Streetcar Culture. I'm gonna have to do a conversion rate on Aussie dollars to American dollars. But anyway, kind of lost my train of thought. Um, the point is that you had two different companies trying to come together with two different business models as the mergers are being talked, and they had two different fiscal years even, and so to try to get two different cars and reputations to meld into one, of course they decided on the American Motor Company as the name of the new company, but for a period of time they were actually being produced Hudson's, Nash's, and American Motor Companies. So they kept the nameplate. So just think about, there's a really cool picture in the book of an assembly line where they have like flagged what part this motor is going into. Is this going into a Nash? Is this going in? So it's pretty cool. But so just think about all of the, as Jason said, kind of doomed from the start, trying to do probably too much, trying to hold on to too much of the same thing. But I know later on, car dealers would basically give American Motors the feedback like, no, kill these nameplates ASAP because it's making it harder for us to sell our own cars. But Jason.
Yeah, which kind of just led me into it. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit before we kind of end this episode and move into something for our next legacy episode. Is that they went from 54 to 1957, sharing names, sharing assembly lines, sharing everything, and trying to do it all at once, trying to be a little bit too ingenuitive. It took them till 1957 to eliminate the Nash and the Hudson off of all their nameplate or all their brands of vehicles. Then they all became AMC, which led into something a little bit different. That, guys, this episode, or this my bunch of information, we're telling you all of this to lead up to officially AMC, which is where we're going to kind of leave off with this episode, and which is going to segue into our next legacy. So next week we have a guest coming back on with my channel, and that's going to be George Clark, who is kind of the producer, the cameraman, the editor for Nick's Garage. And I've met George, and he's a great fella, and he's agreed to be a guest on our show. So that's going to be next week on my channel. And the following week after that, we've got another guest, and then we'll have our legacy episode back here again, talking about AMC from the time of the merger on up and getting into what made them so popular. So, Grant, why don't you see if we've got any questions maybe that's coming out of the chat, because we kind of rambled on a little bit with the history.
Yeah, obviously this took a lot longer than we thought, and we were going to try to keep this at the 35-minute mark, but we probably won't do that. So yeah, please, if you guys have any questions, feel free to lob them in. But I will say that there was one more bit of information we were trying to cover, so I will boil it down to one quote, which I thought was hilarious, and this is where we'll pick up for part 2 at the next legacy episode. But again, we'll wrap, kind of like round out George Romney era, and it was at this point in time, 1958, 59, the small car era actually will be what propels them to some early success. So we'll kind of leave that cliffhanger there. But this quote I thought was very funny. Romney gave a speech to the Motor City Traffic Club of Detroit on January 27th of 1955, in which he says, the large American car was, quote, the dinosaur in the driveway. Cars 19 feet long, weigh 2 tons, and are used to run an 118-pound housewife 3 blocks to the drugstore for a 2-ounce package of bobby pins and lipstick. So couldn't get away with that in 2020, but in 1955, that's a hilarious quote. And there you have it. So yes, anybody with questions, throw them in. Jason, while we leave on that, I didn't know if you wanted to slide in maybe a growth hack or anything.
Well, I think we've kind of gone in as far as our time, excuse me, for tonight. There was just one quick question that came out of the chat just a second ago from Trucker Dave. And he's asking us both what our favorite AMC is. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to hold on to that question, Dave, till the next episode where we're talking about them, because we're kind of going to dive a little bit deeper into the actual AMC brand itself and go from there. So I'm going to hold on to that. I do want to bring up one quick little item with the super chat. Nathan has gone in twice now and put $4.99. I've experienced this myself, where sometimes you can actually physically type in $5 and it won't let you. I don't know if it rounds down or it rounds up or there's a conversion or something in there. For the benefit of the fact that he's now giving you almost $10 worth of chat money, might be worth it to look into the fact that Super Chat doesn't always allow you to give the exact number that you want to. So, having said that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Go ahead.
If anybody's experienced exactly what Jason has described, please do let us know in the comments, because obviously this will be a future problem, ongoing problem if it is. So, yeah, I would be more than willing to give you 10 entries at this point if it's something beyond your control. So, I see that's actually his comment in the last one. So, yeah, we'll give you 10 entries there.
So we did have a couple of new names kind of jump into the chat, or at least names that haven't been here in a while, and one of them was mostly Mopar IH had jumped in there, and El Camino Kyle was there. I think El Camino Kyle's been in the chat in the past, and I think I saw somebody else. Maybe I missed it, but Nathan has been in the chat all night, kind of talking and chatting and giving away some money there too. So guys, thanks so much for being a part of the show. And, we're always appreciative of every time you guys come in, listen to what we have to say. And we thought tonight was going to be a little bit of a free-for-all. We didn't know if it was going to be educational or not. But we felt the need to give you this history so that we could actually get to the point of AMC and talking about them. So the next AMC is going to be a little bit more interesting, where we actually get to talk a little bit about the company and the cars.
Well, and to piggyback on what Jason just said there, while we still have a few waning moments, I know we were a little over our time, but if you could give us feedback now or give us feedback in the comments down below, was this even worth it to you guys? Was it boring? Was it interesting? Again, self-admittedly, Jason and I, this is the first time we're doing a format like this, so we understood that the handoff might be a little cumbersome at times, and then trying to manage all these super chats while telling a story. So let us know, guys, if you want to see this style continue, because we've thought about doing deep dives into more derelict car companies like Studebaker and Packard, maybe DeSoto. So if there's an appetite there, we'll continue to do this. But this is our trial run, and we felt like of all of them, it made the most sense to talk about number 4, AMC. And Jason and I were commenting before we went live how just reading through the histories of Nash and Hudson, like, we're surprised AMC lasted as long as they did. So anyway, give us feedback. We would love to hear it. And with that, I will stop talking and let Jason close out the episode.
Yeah, so we usually at the end of each episode, we talk a little bit about what's some of the things that are coming up on each of our channels. And maybe Grant will do that right quickly. I'll tell you that I did an episode on Dale the truck, and I did the 5 things that I absolutely hate about that truck, and that's gonna be the next video coming up on Old Car Guy. What do you got, Grant, that's coming up for Straight SixFan?
Well, we have gaskets that we need, and we have a carb to rebuild still, but I think it will be for startup time this weekend if everything goes right, as long as I don't have like a leaky water pump, like I didn't install a gasket right when I pressure test the system. But yeah, I think we will be trying to fire up the Fairmont on Sunday. So really excited about that.
Yeah, we're all looking forward to seeing the Fairmont kind of get back on the ground and running again. We want to see some of those new 0 to 60 times in hopes that we can get down below that sub 13 or whatever it was you had there. But anyways, at the end of the day, we want to see Grant driving his car. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on the CarGuy and SixFan show this Thursday evening. We will see you next week on my channel. Stay focused on the windshield, not the rearview mirror. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.